we're looking at overcoming the barriers to inquiry-based STEM. So we're going to start off by looking at what the why inquiry-based STEM. Then we're going to look at the how and how we're going to look at those future-ready skills. Then we're going to look at a little bit of practical things that we can do to help improve inquiry-based STEM in your service or centre, and then we're going to look at transferring that into practice. So some real practical help in early childhood inquiry-based STEM. Okay, and we're going to start off by what I should have done at the welcome is usually a little bit of housekeeping. So the housekeeping, I would usually point out where the toilets were and the emergency exits. I'm hoping that you all know where the toilets are and the emergency exits are. If not, have a quick look round and work out your escape plan. Please introduce yourself on chat and feel free to use that chat to talk to each other as we're going along as well. This is a practical session. We do want to encourage you to discuss things, and we are going to use some breakout rooms later, hopefully, so that you can have a bit of a chat between yourselves as well. If you do have any technical difficulties, put a message up in chat. If you don't know how to use chat or you are struggling with that, please unmute yourself and ask. You know, that's why Sybilla's here to give you a bit of a hand if there's any problems. Okay, so as I said, we're going to look at the future ready skills. We're going to look at how we deliver those future ready skills. We're going to look a little bit about STEM inquiry and deep dive into that. We're going to give you some practical things you can do in your service or setting, and then we're going to look at transferring that into practice. Very quickly, all our workshops, everything Little Scientist does aligns with the EYLF, the NQS, the Australian curriculum, obviously. And our objectives today are to make people aware of the importance of STEM inquiry, make you excited about, hopefully as excited as I am about STEM inquiry in early childhood, and also break down some of those barriers to inquiry-based STEM. And if you are joining us from the older years, don't worry, all of our workshop material, everything is, like I said, aligned with the Australian curriculum, and it can be used from kindergarten all the way up. In fact, I've recently been doing some of these activities with 13, 14-year-olds. So just bear in mind, we do have a lot of activities that are for early childhood, but all of them can be used further up the age groups. Okay. So, why this matters. Now, these next slides, I have to admit, I have a little bit of an issue with, so we're just going to have a look at them, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about why they are important, but also why these aren't necessarily my personal aims or my organisation's personal aims. So why STEM matters? Well, STEM qualifications and skills, STEM skills are essential to Australia's productivity, innovation and success. Well, yes, okay, they are. The Department of Education tells us they are, and they are important. 75% of new jobs are going to require these skills, and 90% of jobs are going to need digital skills in the next 2 to 5 years. Great statistics, and they do support what I do, and I get that. But that's not my why. That's why they are important, but that's not my personal why, and I'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. And why we need to act? Well, 1/3 of 15-year-olds don't have the STEM skills that employers want. And that is a little bit concerning. I have to admit, I used to work at the Australian Museum, and I used to teach the evolution of Australian biota, the plants and animals of Australia. And the number of 15-year-old Australian 15-year-olds that didn't recognise a wombat was actually quite concerning. It is important that we do pass on these STEM skills. But this is my why. The future-ready skills that are in people's minds are STEM skills. Well, look down that list. Why wouldn't we want our children equipped with these skills? Problem solving. We want children to be able to solve their own problems, to be able to be resilient, to be independent. We want them to have self-confidence in the world. We've just listened to that amazing keynote about anxiety, and we want children to be able to have that self-confidence and that courage and that resilience to deal with the things that are going to be thrown at them. So that independence, that response, those research skills, that's resilience, and that metacognitive skills, metacognitive skills, I beg your pardon. That's just, it's a big word. It's just thinking about the way you think. And that's just mindfulness. That's actually right there, that's mindfulness. That's thinking about the why, your own thought patterns and how they produce those answers and that problem solving. So all of that is vitally important to our children. And so that's why I do what I do. And that's why I think that inquiry-based STEM is very important. And we'll look at inquiry-based and inquiry-based STEM learning and the differences between those two things a little bit later on, because in my mind, there's not much difference between inquiry-based and inquiry-based STEM, but we'll touch on that a little bit later. I'm just going to have a sip of tea. Cheers. Don't get between an English girl and a cup of tea ever. Right. Now, we're still on a bit of an introduction, but just going to touch upon inquiry-based learning. Now, I know I'm preaching to the converted here. Inquiry-based learning originates from children's interest and develops organically. So we look at what the child is interested in, but it doesn't necessarily all have to be, oh, excuse me, we have somebody else joining us. Just give me a moment. Nasima, welcome. If you'd just like to introduce yourself in the chat, that's great. Okay, so as we were saying, inquiry-based STEM, it originates from children's interests, and that's a given, isn't it? Why would we even teach something or teach skills using something that children weren't interested in? And we've all got a pretty good idea of what children are interested in, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's not something that you're interested in. For instance, if you have a group of children that aren't necessarily interested in birds and you have a massive passion for birds, your passion is going to come across. So really, in this slide, it should be children's interests and your interests, because if you're passionate about something, if you're really, really interested in plants or birds or physics phenomena or anything to do with, it doesn't even have to be to do with STEM. If you're passionate about something, you can pass that passion on to others. So it does originate from children's interests, but it can originate from your interests as well. Oh, children hopefully are actively involved in decision making. Now, sometimes this is hard, particularly if you teach further up, or you've come from a primary background or a high school background, and you've come into early childhood. Sometimes educators find this particularly difficult. It's possible that you can take a step back. It doesn't necessarily have to be you leading an activity. You can give children the opportunity to take those different roles. And we'll touch a little bit about that in the next slide. But I'm just going to talk a little bit about, first of all, about self-efficacy here. So the psychologist Albert Bandura, and I had to look down to get his name right, but because I always pronounce it wrong, he's defined self-efficacy as one's belief in one's ability to succeed in specific situations. And I think we've all actually had to deal with that recently. So we've all been put somewhat out of our comfort zone. I, for instance, have never done a conference via a webinar before, and so it's a little bit out of my comfort zone. And self-efficacy is the belief in one's own ability to rise to the occasion. Again, we're harking back to that self-confidence in certain situations, and I think Karen Young touched on it brilliantly in the keynote about children having that confidence to deal with what life throws at them, that resilience. And one's sense of self-efficacy can play a major role in how you approach different tasks, goals, and challenges. And so if we're looking at improving critical skills and problem-solving skills, then having that ability to tackle those goals and tasks is really important. How can we do this if we've never had the opportunity early on in life to step into those different roles? So allowing yourself to take a step back and letting the children lead a particular activity or decide what they're going to look at next. To allow the children to have those different roles within an activity is really important. So I can tell you this lovely story, actually. As my role in, and I'm going to just stop the share for a second. Hang on. So in my role as Little Scientist House Coordinator, I go into a lot of different childcares, and I went to this fabulous one in South Australia, and I walked in and it was absolute chaos, and I just thought, oh no. It was messy. It was not what I was expecting at all to see. There were children everywhere, all over the floor. There was stuff all over the floor. I felt out of my comfort zone. It was chaos, absolute chaos. Well, I thought it was chaos, and it actually wasn't. It really wasn't, because you looked around the room and every single child was engaged in doing something and looking at something, and the play that was just so engaging and so inviting. And I sat down with a few and talked about what was going on, and they were all really, really interested in what was happening. And then the educator said, okay, we're going to pack away now. And I thought, oh yeah, you've got a lot of chance getting that done, you know. And then miraculously, the floor cleared. Everybody packed their own things away, took responsibility for packing their own things away. Where when they finished, they went and helped somebody else, and we all met on the floor, and I was introduced. And again, my heart sank. It was, this is Hayley. She's a scientist. Has anyone got any questions for her? And I have to say that when that happens, usually a hand goes up, and somebody asked me a question such as, where does wind come from? And sometimes I don't know the answer. I'm not a meteorologist. I am a scientist, but I'm not a meteorologist, and I don't actually know. And why, also, if I did know the answer, why would I explain high pressure, low pressure, and the difference between them off the coast of Australia to children like my daughter, who thinks that every time I leave the Blue Mountains, we are actually leaving Australia? How would I explain that? And what relevance would that have at that particular time? And so this little boy, David, got up and asked his question. And I actually can't even remember what the question was. And the educator did something in my mind that was so incredible. She said, "That's so fascinating, David. Why do you think that is? What's your idea? How can you test that?" Okay, well, David's interested in finding this out. Who would like to help him? And all these hands went up. And I said, what equipment do we need? And a couple of children said, oh, we need this, we need that. And then she said, oh, so who's going to take responsibility for getting that? Who's going to find this? Who's going to... And she said, right, okay, so we'll set that activity up tomorrow and we will test what David's idea is and we will come up with some solutions. And I just thought, great, that's wonderful. You know, right there, you've got that display of self-efficacy, that wonderful allowing the children to solve their problems, and little scientists, we call that the learning coach. So the learning coach is the person on the side with the pom-poms going, yay, you can do this. And it's the children's responsibility to solve those problems and to help each other and take all those different roles. And that's how we encourage that resilience, that problem solving, and those vital skills. And we'll talk a little bit later about inquiry based and how that applies to other subject areas, not just STEM, but obviously STEM lends itself very well to that. Now I'm just going to share my screen again. Are we all doing okay? Can you thumbs up, or how's everybody feeling on this one? It's very difficult to run a webinar when you don't get feedback as we're going along. Thanks, Hayley. Okay, I've lost you. Here we go. I'm going to share my screen again. Okay. Where are we? So educators can take different roles and facilitate learning. We've just discussed that. And then lastly, and I think this is the most important, it is all about the why. And Little Scientists, I admit, is all about the why we do things, and why, when something happens, why that's happening. Okay, so it doesn't have to be, a STEM activity doesn't have to be big and flash. It doesn't have to be, it's something that's in every day, and we'll talk about a little bit about that later, but that business all about the why. We have this great activity in our water workshop where you dip your fingers, and I'm just going to show you. You dip your fingers in your water glass, in my case, and look at the water drops that come off the fingers. And we talk about why the water all sticks together, why we paint the water drops, we look at the water drops very carefully and look at the light shining off the water drops. And there's all those things, all that wonderful STEM in one single little activity that children might have noticed. And we can pick up on that interest and just talk about with children why those things are occurring. And right there, that's STEM in the everyday. That's STEM happening. So it's all about the why. Why is that happening? My slides have just shot forward. if you'll excuse me. I'm just going to go. Oh no, it's all gone wrong. It's all gone terribly wrong. Here we go, going back. There's now water on my, because I dipped my fingers in my water glass. There is now water on my, oh, we're going through the whole thing. There we go. Ah, this is like a fast forward of my presentation. Here we are, going very quickly through it. I've lost my mouse. Ah, that's it. Screen shape is. There we go. I'm just going to say thank you to my beautiful assistant Sibylla, who's just supplied me with a different mouse. I just got water because I dipped my hand in my water glass. I just got water on my pad and it stopped working. Right, here we go. Hopefully we can share screen again. Here we are. Don't you love it when a good plan comes together? There we go. Now I'm gonna throw it over to you now, hopefully. We're going to talk about what your barriers to doing hands-on inquiry-based STEM are. So I want to hear from you, and it's going to be a little bit difficult because obviously we can't all talk at once. So I'm going to, so don't panic about this, but I'm going to put you into breakout rooms. You're going to have a little bit of a chat with all the different people. So it's going to be groups of 3 or 4, and you're going to be able to have a chat about what problems you face doing a hands-on inquiry-based STEM, what difficulties you can see in doing that, and then we're going to come back. We're going to feed back that information, and then we're going to talk about how we can solve some of those problems. So I'd like you to think about, while I'm setting these groups, these breakout rooms up, what I'd like you to do is just take, with a pen and paper, just jot down the first things that come into your mind, and it can be anything that is stopping you from doing hands-on STEM, inquiry-based STEM. Okay, and in the meantime, I will put you all in a breakout room, hopefully. What I'd like you to do when you go into this room, introduce yourselves. You'll be unmuted, so you can have a little bit of a chat. So you can introduce yourselves and you can talk about the problems that you face in your centre or service or setting. Okay, guys, now I went into 4 different breakout rooms, and some of the conversations that I actually butted in on and eavesdropped on were fantastic. And I really enjoyed listening to what you guys had to say. So I'm hoping that you had a good experience. We are monitoring the chat, so if you do have a little bit of feedback, you are welcome to write it in the chat. But if there is anybody who isn't able to access the chat, then please unmute yourself. Please ask us for some support, because I'm about to put a link in the chat so that you can feedback some of that wonderful discussions that you were having. So I'm going to put that link in the chat now. So this link, what I'd like you to do, if possible, is click on this link, and it will take you through to a survey. And I'd just like you to spend maybe 30 seconds writing down as many of the barriers to STEM as you can. Now, you've got 25 characters there, so you've got you can write sentences if you like, or if it's just short, snappy ideas like you stuck for ideas or background knowledge or resources or lack of support from management or lack of support from parents or messy or anything you like, anything that has come up or resonates as a barrier to you, if you'd like to put that in, so click on that link, and we will get some feedback from you guys as to what your barriers are. And then we will spend the rest of this, we've got another 45 minutes, we'll spend the rest of this 45 minutes of this webinar trying to solve some of those issues for you guys, okay? And we'll also do a little bit of hands-on activities as well that might help. So we'll give you a few minutes to have a go at that. Is that working for you? Yeah. Now, I apologize because obviously, usually at this point in a face-to-face, we would be having some really good in-depth conversations between our groups, and we'll also be having some really good in-depth conversations as a whole group and trying to solve each other's problems. Remember, this is Little Scientists, and the way we actually run our workshops are usually in the same way as we would teach children. So it would be co-constructive, it would be other people taking the lead and talking to their own expertise. It's quite difficult on a webinar when I'm the only person who can talk to actually allow and take a step back and let other people have their say and give us their advice. This is possibly the most unco-constructive and un-inquiry-based webinar that I've actually done. So hopefully this Slido will give you some ways of letting your expertise shine through. Yeah. So we've got 16 people that have yeah. Okay, so I'm going to show those results now, hopefully. Is that what you're seeing? These are our results, yeah? Okay, so we have our results up, and actually we've got quite a few people have said they have a lack of confidence. Ideas and resources are coming up big time. You can tell by the size of the words there. A lack of background knowledge is another one that we actually at Little Scientists, we hear that a lot, and I will talk to redress that one a little bit later. Not knowing the why, excellent. You've come right to the actual heart of the matter there. Valuing the moment, that's great. I love that, because that is actually, so actually I'm going to pick up on that one first. Valuing the moment, that to me is the heart of this. If you think about mindfulness, and mindfulness is a big thing in the classroom at the moment, a big thing in early childhood, and a big thing throughout education. And we all would like, all of us would like to be a little bit more mindful about our use of resources, a bit about living in the moment, living in, and generally being more mindful. And actually, to me, and I realised that the image of the scientist as the male, balding, with glasses, white coat scientist is one that's been all the way through culture. It's all the way through our culture. And I'd like you to think about, actually, scientists are actually possibly extremely mindful. If you think about the apple falling from the tree and hitting Isaac Newton on the head, well, how many of us would just go, oh God, I've been hit by an apple? Whereas actually he's sat there and he's thought about that moment, and he's taken that moment, and an entire branch of science has been opened up because of that one moment. And valuing that moment, valuing that minutiae that has just happened, and asking yourself why that has happened, is actually a really mindful moment. And it's actually, rather than just rushing on to the next thing. And I went into a really interesting breakout room a moment ago about I went into a breakout room that they were talking about the baking soda volcano, and actually asking why is possibly the most important thing you can do in that situation. And it doesn't necessarily mean, and also this touches on a couple of other people's feedback, you don't actually have to know the reason why something is working. How many of us actually know the chemical reaction of the baking soda volcano? How many of us actually would explain, if we do know the baking soda volcano, why we would actually discuss the chemical reaction of the baking soda volcano? So we're not actually, that activity is not actually about volcanoes. It's not actually about the science that's happening in that reaction. So when we come to the why, we can actually ask the children, why do you think that's occurring? What do you think is happening? And it's about that self-efficacy again. You're actually letting the children answer that why. And that's the same with all those other situations as well. Why does the apple drop? Why does the color walk? What is actually happening here? And that to me is valuing the moment, and actually is actually very important. And we do these demonstrations, or we let the children do an activity, and taking a step back and letting them explain why they think something is happening is as equally as important as you knowing the answer. And like I said, you don't need to know the answer. Going back to that one about why wind occurs, and it's not always because I had a curry last night. Why wind occurs, my daughter, this was a few years back, was asked me how wind occurs, and I actually tried to explain, and it was a disaster. It really was a disaster. And she said, "Mummy, you're wrong. Actually, this is why wind occurs, and it's because trees talk to each other." And luckily enough, I recovered myself enough not to go, "Don't be silly, that doesn't happen," which was what my husband was saying in the background. What actually was important is that I said to her, "That's a fantastic idea. How are we going to test that idea?" And she said, "Well," because we were standing in the garden at the time, and it was windy, and it really did sound like the trees were talking to each other. I said, "Well, we're going to the beach next weekend. Are there any trees on the beach?" And she said, "No." And she said, "Well, that's how we're going to test it. What we're going to do is we're going to go to the beach, we're going to see whether it's windy, and then we're going to look at that idea and see whether we can narrow it down." And that's important, because I'm giving value to her idea. I'm helping her problem solve that idea and looking for the solution. And I'm taking her ideas seriously. And it might not be, you might have that child in that class who's there going, I've got the answer, I've got the answer. And they might not have the answer, but you're giving weight to that idea. And actually, trees do talk to each other. We've since found out through science. There's a whole system of chemical reactions where trees do actually talk to each other. So if I'd actually said, actually, don't be silly, they don't, I'd have been wrong as well. So that's the way I did it. Now, I've just had a message from Sibylla saying that I need to hurry this up a little bit. So we're going to go back to the PowerPoint. I will, by the way, send you the results as well at some point. So I'm going to give you a couple of practical ideas to help you solve some of these problems. So one of the big ones was coming up with STEM ideas. And I'm just going to very quickly talk you through some of these symbols. Now, these symbols are from our workshops. We have 10 different workshops. I had to count them then. We've got human body, computer science, acoustics, air, design and technology, mathematics. You get the general gist. I'm not going to read the slide out. We have these STEM cards, which have situations on them. And what we do is we use these situations in order to generate some ideas. So we've got this great picture of washing up. And what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to look at this picture, and in the chat, I would like you to think of some STEM opportunities or STEM ideas that are to do with the washing up. Okay, and if you've got some ideas, you can put them in the chat. And then I'm going to run you through the way I would look at this in order to generate a few more STEM opportunities. Can you see the chat? Is there anything going on? Great. No. Oh, wonderful. So we've got what does soap do? Excellent. Ways to make bubbles, wet and dry. Lovely. Hot and cold. Excellent. Some really good STEM ideas there that we can extend on. Okay, so this is a little trick that I use actually, because although I did introduce myself as a national certifications manager, we've just got someone coming in actually. I'll just let them in. My main job for Little Scientists is professional geek. So I come up with a lot of the ideas that we use, and I'm going to be running through those today. So these are our ways of sparking ideas. So just think about this picture, and I want you to think about it from a mathematics point of view, okay, or an engineering point of view, or a chemistry point of view. So starting with chemistry, for instance, you could look at different bubble mixes. You could look at what causes the bubbles in the first place. We could talk about the mathematics of bubbles, and we are going to talk about that a little bit later. We can talk about human body. That's quite a big one at the moment. We can talk about hand washing. We can talk about why we wash the plates in the first place. So if you look at washing up through each different lens, it can help you generate some ideas. Now, I have some practical things here, and I'm just going to do a couple of practical So I've got some bubble mix here, or it could be washing up liquid. And if you've got this at home, you can also do that. There's two ways we could generate some bubbles. Thank you. And there's two ways we can generate some bubbles. We could use a straw and we can blow into our bubble mix. And if you're doing this in your, if you're doing this as well, if you've got the equipment list, you can do this alongside me. Or another thing you can do is using a funnel and a J cloth, and you can use an elastic band as well. You could also make a bubble snake. So if you dip the end in here. Now, if you're doing this at home, and you can do a bubble snake, or you could blow into your bubble mix and make some bubbles. And you can make a bubble snake. Now, we do this, sometimes we link it to a rainbow snake, we make a rainbow bubble snake. Sometimes we see how long a bubble snake we can make, and that's a great way of testing our different bubble mixes. So we're getting the chemistry in there as well. Okay, so the different bubble mixes. But I'm just going to show you a little bit of maths to do with washing up and bubbles. And I'm trying not to make a mess here, because I always do. Can I have a piece of kitchen roll? Thank you. Okay. We can also do bubble printing. I have never managed to get bubble printing to work on camera, which is why we're not doing bubble printing at the moment. But it is possible. I'm told it is possible to do bubble printing, and I'm sure some of you experienced educators out there have probably been more successful in bubble printing than I have. So here we go. So I've got my bubbles here. If you're doing this at home, what I'd like you to do is, if you've got some food colouring, you can add it. It makes it a little bit more clearer. But I'm going to cheat, and rather than trying to show you the bubble mix, I'm going to show you my screen, where here's one I prepared earlier. We're going to have a quick look at bubbles. Now, I've got a great picture of bubbles there, and it's actually the bubbles of foam from eucalyptus oil. So sometimes if you're out bushwalking, you can actually see bubbles, and that foam is actually it's actually a natural occurring thing. But what I'm interested in here from a mathematics point of view is look at the sides of the bubbles. If you count the number of sides each of those bubbles have, some of them are 5, the majority of them are 6. And I've done this with children and with bubble prints, and it's commonly 6. It's nature always goes for hexagons, and there's some really good explanations why. But actually, looking at bubbles, I've got another person coming in. Looking at bubbles, hello if you've just joined us, by the way. We're looking at bubbles, and we're looking at hexagons in bubbles, and we're investigating how these bubbles form as well. Sorry, I've lost my train of thought. I do apologise. Just hang on a second. I'm trying not to spill the bubble mix. Okay. So why hexagons? And why do bees make hexagons as well? Well, when you blow a bubble, and I don't have a bubble wand, otherwise I would do. the bubble always forms a sphere. And there's a reason for that. It's the largest volume of air with the smallest amount of bubble mix. It's also actually the reason why elephants are round. It's the reason why the wombat is roundish as well. And it's to do with surface area and volume. And it's the same with the bees. In fact, it's originally thought that bees actually make round homes for their to lay their eggs in. But nature doesn't like a vacuum, and it's a hexagon is the biggest shape, or a shape that will tessellate, will fit together, but leave no gaps. And so a hexagon, bees have got the perfect solution. What they're doing is they're making the biggest amount of space they can for the smallest amount of wax. So it's incredible how this has happened. And if you look at, for instance, the hexagons on a turtle shell, if you look at the, I've got a picture of quite an attractive fly there. If you look at the eyes, they've formed hexagons as well. And it's because it's the smallest amount, it's the biggest bang for your buck, basically. It's the smallest amount of substance for the largest amount of space. And that's why the bubbles are mostly hexagons. Now, actually, would we go into that explanation with children? But how fascinating is it that most of those bubbles form a hexagon shape? And that is something that is interesting to scientists all the way up to my age. But it's something that can be discovered in early childhood, and we can run with it. We can look at those bubbles. And it's a case of, again, being mindful, living in that moment, asking ourselves why. So it's fun to create a bubble snake. It's fun to do the washing up, but there's also a lot of maths we can get in that situation. We can also get all sorts of information from the lid of my plastic pot as well. For instance, and we're just going to very quickly look at the next slide. We've got, and these are my tessellations, and I used the word tessellation earlier, so I thought I better explain what tessellate means. So a tessellation is just a tile that fits together, and so squares tessellate, rectangles tessellate, hexagons tessellate. It just means they fit together without any gaps. And this is the work of an artist called MC Escher, and I'm going to show you how to do one of these as well in a second. But I'm just going to show you the lid of my pot at the moment, the lid of my plastic pot. I use this as to catch my bubble snake, so it didn't go everywhere. And this lid fits in 1, 2 times. So I can make a little spot. A square one would actually fit in 4 times. So this is going back to my washing up. And another mathematical thing I can look at is how many times my lid fits on in different ways. And that's just rotational symmetry. Okay. Now, apparently we've only got 10 minutes left, so I'm going to run you through a few other different activities that you can do, practical activities. And I'm sorry about that. It's quite difficult to judge how long things should be. So I've got just a plate here. What I've done is this is a demonstration of water and the properties of water. So I've got a plate here. With some cocktail sticks. Okay, hopefully you can see that still. And I've got a glass with some water. That's fine, that's fine. And I've got a little dropper here. Now, most of our stuff at Little Scientists is done with recycled materials, but these droppers, I actually found, they've got lots of different types, and I found them in Dayzone, if you have a Dayzone. And I'm just adding water. A little bit of water. Now, some of these activities can be used as prompts to start investigations. Some of them demonstrate phenomena. But this one I just thought I'd show you very quickly because I like it because it forms a nice star. Now, that demonstrates a couple of things. It talks about surface area. We can talk about other properties of water, and it actually demonstrates surface tension. Okay. Now, I know we don't have much time, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to send you some of these slides and this practical demonstration, and I'm going to also give you a little bit of hints about the science behind this. But again, I'm going to remind you that what I think is important, and I'm hoping that I've communicated that to you as well, is that what is important is that we let the children raise a question. And this is our inquiry cycle, so it sort of is about scientific inquiry. So we let the children raise a question, and it can be a science question, it can be a STEM question, but remember, it can also be, you know, something about art, it could be something about history, it could be anything, but it's coming from the children, hopefully. We can collect some ideas. So, sweetheart, what do you think? Why do you think that is? What do you think about this? David's had this question. What do you think what the solution is to that? Okay, you can ask those questions and we can gather and have a discussion about that, and we can take your ideas seriously. And remember, it doesn't always have to be the children. You have a voice too. We're co-constructing this. Okay, we're building this together. We can try things out, we can conduct an experiment, we can research. We don't have to research the answer, but we can actually research how to find that answer. Observe and describe. A lot of people, documentation obviously is important, but actually a lot of people don't do is discuss the results, revisit that documentation. Okay, and I think that's quite important because it can lead us to the next question, and we can go round again. So if we've looked at bubbles and we've looked at and the shape of bubbles maybe, and then we can go round again and see what see whether we have another hypothesis, another idea. Okay, we were going to look at the science behind a cup of tea. But I'm just going to put this slide up just to remind you a few things. Okay, first of all, I identify an interest, create that environment where that interest can be generated. Don't be afraid to show your own excitement for something, be it art, be it STEM, be it birds, be it planting, be it anything. Just don't be embarrassed to go, yes, actually, I love cars, because I actually love cars. It could be anything. Support that planning process. Help, ask the children for support. Okay, we were going to talk a little bit about resourcing and how we can talk about resourcing, but we sadly don't have that time, but I will put some ideas in the notes. But remember, your enthusiasm is as important as your knowledge. Children can take age-appropriate responsibility. Maybe you don't want them playing with fire, but they can actually, you know, take part in some of these risky things. Peer group learning from each other is really important. Okay, those were our results, or some of our results. And just one last thing, if you look online, the Little Scientist House program, which is what the certification program I run, please have a look at that. I know quite a few of the people here are from C&K. We've got a couple of C&K houses, and learn from them as well. Okay, now I'm going to ask, pardon? I was actually going to also just talk very briefly about our Little Scientist Award. It's opening on the 1st of July. Please go online. It's basically an early childhood STEM project, but schools can be involved as well. I know there's a couple of schools here, but please have a look online. Google it if you need to. Go on littlescientist.org.au. And it's a way of hopefully getting inquiry-based STEM into mainstream. Now I'm going to and hopefully you've been inspired to try some of this stuff in your centre or setting. Okay, and I've got a great toilet paper experiment which we didn't get to try, which is a real shame because it's about what you can flush and what you can't. So I'll send that in the notes as well. Pardon? Oh, and one last thing. If you look on our website, there's videos for majority of these things. There's also equipment lists, and there's really, there's videos that I filmed at home. So please be gentle with the videos, but that actually might also give you a little bit of inspiration as well. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. And I will include my email address if you want me to send any of the resources through to you, and I'll make sure that I include some of the links to some of these videos and things. Oh, there's actually a really good tessellation video on our website, so please check that out. Notice that Sibylla has just mentioned we are actually putting our water workshop online. So if you are interested in coming to a full-scale webinar on inquiry-based STEM, then we have our foundation workshop, which is the water workshop, coming online. I believe it's the 30th of July, and there's one in September. The 9th, apparently. See, this is why she's my boss, is because she remembers details like this. Thanks, guys. I had a lot of fun, but it's the first time I've done an entire workshop without talking to anybody, and I'm feeling a little bit kind of. It's quite difficult not when you don't have the straightaway feedback. So I apologise. We didn't get to sensory issues, and we didn't get answer. Louise, if you're still here, I'm so sorry.